I would say really there are two, kind of sectors in specialty retail that are going to kind of duke it out for the next 10 years. You have the traditional retail brands. They may have come from a store background or a catalog background, but they're trying to figure out, kind of what is their new paradigm? How invested do they need to continue being in their traditional channels, and how do they evolve and make their investments in digital? What do they do for their loyal customers, and how do they think about their inventory mix? The other group of customers are these other group of retailers are these digitally native, vertically integrated brands that started often with a website, or they started with an e-commerce presence. But as they think about scaling, they need to figure out, how do they reach more customers? Because one of the challenges with starting from a digital first brand is that it is really, really hard to get massive reach. And you can get very fast reach often with social channels. But you often hit your peak pretty quickly, and scaling often does require a physical store. So you almost have two types of companies with opposite challenges, and they both are coming. They both recognize the importance of digital, but they also have to grapple with the limitations of stores too. And it'll be really, really interesting to see how those two channels actually play out in the next few years.
So I'm Billy May. I'm a fourth generation retailer. My great grandfather, grandfather, and father, all in the business. I grew up in our family business. I got my start as a traditional merchant in the May Company Executive Training Program, but I've spent the last almost 20 years focused at the intersection of digital and physical. So I'm the Chief Customer Officer at J. Crew. Previously, I was the CEO at Sur La Table, and I was Senior Vice President in charge of marketing, direct-to-consumer, corporate development at Abercrombie and Fitch. For J. Crew, because the heritage was as a catalog operation. And then, believe it or not, the company went online with e-commerce in 1996. And upwards of a quarter of its business, in the late 90s was through digital. And so you could say that was catalog based, that, you were just taking the transaction online, but it was a direct to consumer business. It was, you hear a lot about digital native vertical brands. This was a true direct to consumer brand, started opening stores. And then you really saw the hockey stick with store openings in the early 2000s and into the 2010s. And what remained is this core engine around direct to consumer. And so even though a lot of the growth and expansion was on the brick and mortar side, the digital piece was always central to the business and central to the brand, to the point where even pre-COVID, almost 2/3 of the revenue came through e-commerce. A digital-first approach was really endemic to the business, in the business model. There weren't separate teams in terms of merchandising and planning. We merchandised and planned as an integrated business. The go-to-market approach was a highly integrated approach. Now, that didn't mean that we let digital kind of drive the go-to-market strategy. It was still a store-based operating model. And so there are floor sets, and there's a markdown cadence, all of which is generally driven by the stores. And so you had this rhythm to the business that the largest component was in digital, but the music sheets, the notes, and the song was really, in some cases, driven by the stores. When we looked at priorities for the year, in terms of significant capital projects and investments we wanted to make. The company had started down a path of beginning to essentially break apart its digital infrastructure from a very monolithic legacy vertical stack to a more headless. It's a very in vogue term, but a headless commerce structure where we could take best of breeds components. And then when we thought about omnichannel, the company already had a lot of capabilities in place. They had visibility into store level inventory. We were already doing ship from store and ship to store, not buy online, pickup in store. That was not on the 2020 priority list, but was on a future upgrade as part of an order management enhancement. And then the last piece was really around the customer. We had a very legacy database, was built, during our catalog heydays. Would take 5 to 6 weeks to get information and data back on transactional trends, even for e-com. So if we wanted to look at the customer behavior in an integrated way, it would take significant time. So one of the priorities was we've got to move off of this legacy framework and move towards a more modern architecture, so we can get a read on customer behavior, even if it's just digital only. We can get a read in a matter of days as opposed to weeks, and then integrating the customer piece. One of the things I do think is important is that most companies think of omni as just inventory. And it's my strong belief that when you think of omni, it's a seamless experience, including the customer, including the transaction data, and including the inventory piece. And I think most people tend to only focus on the inventory piece. And I think that integrated journey with the customer information in detail, the transactional information in detail, and then the inventory piece.
I started off my career actually on Wall Street before realizing after doing a debt offering that the retailer that I was sitting across the table from was having much more fun than I was as an investment banker. So I very quickly figured out a way to catapult myself into the retailing industry. I actually was at a startup in .com 1.0, baby style, for 5.5 years. Tremendous learning experience. Was then brought my talents to New York City and started working with Liz Claiborne, where one of the first things we did was acquire Kate Spade, which was pretty incredible. So going from that startup to a multi-billion-dollar company and doing amazing things back then, if you can think back that far, if you were even alive that long ago, it was a time where wholesale was dying and direct-to-consumer was on the rise. And so I've been on that direct-to-consumer wave for quite a bit of time. And then had an opportunity to join Tadashi as a chief operating officer. So that's really where the senior level experience and management levels, and why my career has been so broad from a functional perspective. But it's allowed me, because after that point, I went into private equity operating partner roles. And so working with a whole host of companies that are PE and VC backed and helping them achieve their owners' goals. And it was most recently and through that same consulting firm that I met Untuckit. And I started off in an engagement helping them with an ERP implementation, as well as the start of their omni-channel roadmap, and ripping and replacing their POS and putting in a mobile POS that was omni-channel capability enabled, to being asked to come in as a full-time chief digital officer and chief information officer. So in order to survive as a digitally native startup, you have to land the customer acquisition, but also the customer retention. And those are so difficult in this time and age, given the scarcity of dollars from an investment perspective, but the need to measure and to appeal to as many customers as possible to prove out and build the moat that's required because there will be other upstarts that, of course, will come into your enviable space and start to eat away at your advantage. And that's what we've seen in all of the major categories that have been started by digitally native trailblazers. And so from a customer 360 perspective, The technology still has not arrived to be able to give you customer 360 out the box because the channels are so bifurcated between e-commerce, which is where we all started, and then we bolt on a store base and then trying to tie that together. Now, I recognize legacy brands also have that challenge, and it's even worse given technical debt, but it still exists for digitally native startups. We're in the business of X product, not necessarily in knowing how to build out a technology stack that's next generation and bleeding into customer 360. We want to position ourselves from a digitally native perspective very differently than some of the brick and mortar retailers in being very seamless. When we open our stores, we want you to feel the difference. We want to bring some of what made us special online into the actual physical stores that we have. And so whether that's a small footprint or it's our sales associates who are incredibly well educated about all of our products and our offering, or the level of customer service that we give you. So as we start moving into the omni-channel, giving you the opportunity to have buy online, pick up in store, and having an SLA that rivals the Best Buys of the world. All of that has been historically what we were looking to do, but doing it in a cost-effective manner and also a way that has some of the uniqueness and the characters so that when that customer walks away, they feel the ease, the Warby Parker approach to life, that it was much simpler than the alternative.
Rachel Mack. I'm the CEO of Digital Matter. We are a digital marketing consultancy. So in essence, we are an amalgam of a management consultancy and a performance marketing agency. So from March 15th through today, 23rd, we've actually seen spend increase by 18% period over period. We obviously know that spend has increased as there's been a shift from brick and mortar to digital and e-com. I think the big question for everyone is what's going to happen post-vaccine. So what's changed is that we've seen with 80% of our current portfolio of clients, we have seen that net new, not new to e-com, but net new we've seen a clear increase in new customer acquisition. We saw it initially pick up around April, May, sort of stabilize, and then it picked up again August, September, October, and through November. So we think there obviously are waves as people become more comfortable in sort of this new normal and adoption. We also know that people are more willing to try new brands. They're willing to try new things.
When COVID hit, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face. Then it became a matter of, all right, now how do we look at priorities? And how do we think about, in a remote environment with stores? Okay, what are we doing with stores? How do we think about stores? How do we think about the associate? How do we think about the customer? How do we think about the inventory, which it's spring, you got a lot of new goods, which just hit. And oh, by the way, we're going to close all of our stores. We're still operating day to day at a time when after stores closed and amazingly, customers were still buying, we saw elevated volume that was equivalent to Black Friday for 6 weeks. Our distribution center, which is in Lynchburg, Virginia, was not set up or staffed to operate at that level for that long a period of time, let alone during a pandemic where if somebody came in with a cold, it could shut down the whole operation. And so it was a high wire act for a month and a half as we began to think about how do we really ensure that the business can stay afloat. We were fortunate in that a significant portion was already in digital. And so it was a matter of supercharging that element and ensuring that we could deliver. How do we think about stores? Can we get back into stores in a safe way for our associates to keep them employed and at the same time attack some of the inventory? How can we take some of those resources and develop a plan to reopen stores? How can we take those resources and think about processes differently? How do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them employed? And how do we keep the engine of the business operating and moving forward. And at the same time, how are we managing the customer expectation? And I think for me personally, one of the great lessons is customers are loyal to brands, and as a result, in many cases, they're amazingly patient with brands. And there's an element of being transparent with them. Hey, it might take a little longer to get your product because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Customers were amazingly understanding. And then it was, can the operation sustain that level of volume, that level of traffic, that level of demand for an extended period of time? And that definitely taxed our legacy infrastructure. But because we had developed this pseudo headless architecture and we were kind of midstream in that migration path, that allowed us to create headroom in the business that I think we were very fortunate to have in place at the outset of the pandemic.
The year is 2024, when you partnered with CI&T to engineer a pathway to help Marta build her credit. You gave her the financial freedom to teach English overseas. CI&T, Global Digital Specialists.
We were all shocked. Many digitally native brands, because of their nascence, were up and to the right. That's all they've experienced. And to, for the first time, have the kind of shock where if you did move into opening retail stores, they now required being closed. And I'd say digitally native brands were more comfortable with remote work. It's just the nature of younger startups. But ultimately, that factor that our humans who are on the front lines, there's real cost. So those conversations inside the boardrooms, inside of our leadership executive teams, that was not a fun time. There was a lot of fear. And ultimately, fortunately, we're on the other side of it now, and we didn't lose anyone along the way. So that was really fantastic. But when it comes to the processes in the organization, it was a wonderful opportunity, whether we like it or not, to realize that we weren't as far along as we had hoped and where we needed to be. The customer was demanding, once we reopened the stores, curbside pickup. It was something that we spun up. But looking out at those customers and who really were the first to come back into the stores, they helped us understand what they wanted in that new experience. So it's forced us to really think about, what is the role of our retail stores today? Before, the retail stores were customer acquisition vehicles. Obviously, they were opportunities for us to service our customers, but now they're turning more into fulfillment or into appointments. And that requires a completely different model. And so being nimble, as much as we say we are, this really forced us to take a step back, understand what each channel is good at, because it's now changed, and then to respond accordingly. And then I'd say the last really big change that we've had, but we were marching towards it, and COVID has just been an accelerant. And I wrote about this in an article. The physical and the digital, even within our company, were two separate divisions. Uniting them, as I term them, the phygital, right? The physical and the digital, where the order might have started online, but it was fulfilled in store. And so we had to work through all the things that we knew we are ultimately going to have to do. Who gets credit for the sale? Well, that happens in the demand. Then we have a fulfillment location. But then how do you think about merchandising and filling the stores and making sure we give the customers a complete experience when they walk in? You don't want all of your inventory going potentially to customers who purchased online, because you still need a presentation. We had customers who used to come into the stores always. That was their preferred channel. But now they're online and they're discovering online. And so I think that's going to potentially be a new behavior. We no longer can call them store-only customers. They've migrated to online, and coming out of this, yeah, maybe they'll come into the store, but because they realize the convenient level of our e-commerce platform, they now may become omnichannel customers. when I take a step back, putting on my analytics hat, I know that's good. Our omni-channel customers end up spending, 3 to 5x more. So letting the customer lead us, and then figuring out what are the right strategies to appeal to them as they make their choices of how they want to engage with us. But it was a shock. We were used to seeing nice and steady and measuring in certain ways. Now it's become a little harder to understand, but coming out of this, potentially some of that behavior may go back. So then you need to readjust your cohort analysis and let those customers self-select back into the stores. Or we may have a flare up that happens in potentially the next few months. Then they may go back to shopping online. So it really depends. And we simply need to be nimble and reactive and try our best to appeal to customers in the channel with the product at the right time.
Marketing has changed significantly. I mean, I'm 42 years old, and when I started out in this space, you had brand marketers and creatives sitting in one part of an office, and you had likely your sort of PPC, SEM, SEO specialists sitting in another part. And by the way, your data people were like in the back office. And what's happened is, and God forbid that anyone who is in sort of the organic space had anything that was ever touched by anyone in sort of the performance space. What we've seen is really the confluence. And in addition of owned and organic and paid, and really the desire, I think, to apply a way to quantify or a universal source of truth to be applied to all sort of parts of the journey that one can track, but also an acknowledgement of, I think, what the analog piece of it. We know it takes 3 to 5 touches for a new customer to get through a conversion funnel. And I think that's a conservative estimate. So those 3 to 5 touches don't always have to be, or don't necessarily exclusively reside within the digital conversion funnel. It's naive to think that we are getting inundated, and that comes in many forms. So I think that, and PR in itself is really interesting because that's changed with the advent of the influencer, which I think is changing again today with COVID. We're seeing a very different sort of take on influencer marketing. We're seeing a micro influencer, and people are looking to their own sort of networks for referral and viral influencing rather than the sort of traditional influencer with a capital I. So we've seen a lot more integration and data, and I would say analytic chops coming into the forefront and becoming the sort of the node or the nexus of collectively of digital marketing and performance marketing. I don't think you'd speak to any CMO or CEO today in a B2C role who would tell you that data and analytics aren't an important part of their everyday marketing efforts, and being fluent in it is no longer sort of a nice to have, it's requisite.
If you think of marketing in particular, and potentially how the COVID crisis has changed and evolved, the space, certainly the focus on digital performance, I'll call it even the traditional channels within paid search, and the performance-oriented aspect of the business. The level of focus and criticality, both in terms of acquisition and in retention, has probably never been higher. And that's true both on the media side in terms of paid placement, but also on what I call the life cycle marketing aspect. So the abandonment, the trigger, the post-purchase, the life cycle marketing aspect of how and when you're pinging the consumer and connecting that with the broader experience. You're beginning to move further down into the database. What was traditionally a transactional database then became a customer database is now a customer data platform. And it's not just for digital, it's in an omni way. And so I think that from my perspective, the marketing element is an output from the broader digitization of the operating model and what I call a digital operating system. It's a bad acronym because it sounds like DOS, and if you're in IT, that gives you you have a tick because of the name. But my belief is it's not just the bolt-on for e-commerce. You're hear a lot of executives talk about, it's really about e-com and scaling e-com and going direct, and it's not. It's really around the integrated experience. It's not like stores are going away. In fact, the store experience should be enhanced by digital, just like the digital experience is enhanced by physical. And so the marketing element is a connective tissue between those two experiences. And you're beginning to see, a really rich ecosystem around content. I think the TikTok experience, let's assume that it stays around. Short form video is ripe for commerce. It is an algorithm based experience, whereas Facebook is more peer based. The TikTok algorithm around discovery is incredible, and so how can you leverage that for product discovery? How can you leverage that idea for relevance? Like, there's a whole opportunity in the broader landscape and ecosystem for brands to better connect and be relevant to their end consumers, as opposed to pushing, traditional campaign work. There's a company that just launched called The Yes. It's algorithmic based commerce, and the Yes is all about surfacing and building a relevant customer experience based on an algorithm. And the research suggested that the number one way to create loyalty and stickiness is not with points and incentives and it's with relevance, right? If I can come to you and I know what you have is going to be relevant to me, it's unique to me, it's specific to me. Yes, okay, you can say personalized to me. I'm more apt to make the purchase because it's seamless, it's easy, it's convenient, and it's relevant. This isn't about influencers. These are about customers participating in the journey and having an opportunity to shape that. And that's where I do think the discovery aspect is really exciting these days. There's a lot of innovation that's occurring, but you got to have the dollars to make those sorts of investments, and you got to look at it in terms of what is it you're really trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve awareness and consideration, or is it really bottom of the funnel? And look, during a pandemic, it's bottom of the funnel because you're trying to move the needle. But freeing up the dollars through cost savings and otherwise to invest in that discovery process further up the funnel, there's a lot of exciting activities happening today, and leveraging that data back into the customer journey using the technology, you can call it what you will, AI or machine learning or otherwise, and learning from it in a very rapid fashion is really exciting. And I think that's really where marketing, the opportunity is for marketing going forward.
The entire world of gaming is incredibly interesting for us. So 45 to 50% of gaming audience, women. So you're talking about a really balanced sort of end user that you're marketing to. There's an enormous opportunity, and one that in the esports and gaming space that I think we have just scratched the surface. We have leaned more heavily into Facebook, and Instagram have always been great to us and have always served us well. Now, we utilize best practices, but we also have some machine learning algorithmic tools that we put on top of what Facebook is doing, and Pinterest and Snapchat and TikTok, that enable us to, in essence, optimize to get more juice out of the squeeze, for lack of a better descriptor. So to optimize revenue throughput. So Snapchat's and TikTok are interesting from an expansion opportunity. It's fascinating to me that TikTok is actually, that there is an older demographic on TikTok who is responsive. We will continue to, we connected TV, digital audio, Say a lot of the placement opportunities that are available vis-a-vis DV and SA360, which used to be DoubleClick, those are incredibly interesting to us. And with floodlight tagging, you can dedupe, so you really get a cleaner read. The other piece that I would say, which is not sexy in any capacity, but feed. So you'd think it's sort of unloved. No one knows where it fits. We have this, we are fortunate in that we work with, and we probably will internalize this come Q1, feed consultants, people whose specialty is just feed. And I know that it sounds strange, Ken, but think about all of those dynamic ads that you're served on Facebook and Pinterest and Snapchat. And then think about Google Shopping. Those are all feed-based. And guess what? Every single one of those has a different need. None of them are standardized. And so utilizing a tool like a Feednomics or building a tool greenfields is a real opportunity, and having that expertise of how to manage and optimize a feed is incredibly valuable. As Facebook continues to invest in shopping and owning the retail experience, the funnel, what will be very interesting for us, and we talk about this all the time, is to see how much of our advertising drives to end user, meaning site or app, versus within Facebook and Instagram. It's fascinating if you have not spent time on Facebook Marketplace to do so, even to see sort of from a peer-to-peer garage sale perspective, how that's functioning. I have heard more people in the last 3 months say to me, I have bought a used car, I have bought a boat, I have bought X, Y, and Z off of Facebook Marketplace, something I was, as in this space, was totally unaware of, as a sort of secondary or tertiary sort of marketplace. Now that I'm aware of it, I'm fascinated.
We help companies perform while they transform. We have the experts and experience to help you get the most out of your people, processes, and technology. Reach out today for a free consultation to learn how we can help your organization.
At Ministry of Supply, we use NASA patented materials to craft the planet's most comfortable clothes, rigorously tested to be everything-proof and perform all day. Ministry of Supply, comfort everywhere, unlocked by science.
I do think that the idea of omni, certainly within inventory management, inventory accuracy, our industry has been has a tremendous opportunity because, look, everybody for the most part is going to get a pass on 2020 because of the broader landscape, and so it's an opportunity to clean up business, clean up inventory, and in particular, begin to get it right. So begin to localize assortment, begin to marry assortment with customer data, and begin to create that relevance at a local level. That can be digitized. How do you take that customer data and truly operationalize it across the organization, not just from an e-commerce standpoint, or how do we build it into digital? How do you operationalize it within planning, within allocation, within supply chain, within fulfillment? Like, I think that there's a whole host of opportunity to accelerate in that area. Certainly, real estate is going to continue to evolve. I'm a big proponent of looking at market-based and customer-based profitability as opposed to channel-based profitability. So thinking about a market like Columbus, and you might have 1 or 2 stores, and those stores represent X million in revenue and Y million in contribution. But you also have a digital business that is tightly integrated with your stores, whether it's buy online pickup, whether it's shipped from store, whether it's shipped to store, any of those other elements. And that digital business within the geographic radius of Columbus is another added focus. So how big is the Columbus market? How would you look at the P&L of the Columbus market? And if you thought of it in that way, would you think of the profitability of your stores differently because of the role that the stores are playing? Maybe it's not a 7,000 or 8,000 square foot location. Maybe it's a 2,500 square foot location because of the market that it can serve and how big it is and how big the customer opportunity is. And the one area that certainly has gotten a lot of interest and activity online during the pandemic is around payments. And the traditional payment infrastructure with credit cards and otherwise, a lot of contactless payment has crossed the chasm because of COVID. For a business like J.Crew, which has a high penetration of a private label credit card, that is both a threat, but it also creates an opportunity. When you think about that customer journey, that transaction experience in a store, you think about the cash wrap, maybe there is no more cash. Maybe it's only contactless and credit. And I do think that journey is going to evolve. I think progressive, forward-looking retailers are going to look at it as an opportunity to really rethink that customer shopping experience. And again, how does it integrate? How does it start online? How does it work in the store? What happens after they leave? The payment aspect, loyalty integration. If you look to China, where a lot of innovation has leapfrogged the American market, they are leaders in payments. They are leaders in contactless. It is a cashless society.
Digital transformation is enterprise-wide. And while the focus may be on omnichannel and digital marketing, I definitely say the entire enterprise needs to adopt a digital-first mindset. And talking about supply chains, the speed with which life cycles are happening right now from a product level, I won't even quote the stats. It's embarrassingly long. And then as we look at the pipeline of what's coming out from a liquidation perspective, we understand it. Product is being made potentially a year before the actual moment where it's presented to the customer. That can't stand. Trends are happening so quickly now, and the best retailers out there, the Zaras that have the shortest 6-week supply chains, we need to adopt some of that. So the world is actually now starting to meet in the middle. I think we're being led by a lot of the athletic organizations. They're in their release mentality and limited drops and limited quantities, which of course some of the luxury players have started to implement. That's where the world is going. But that requires a very agile supply chain. And it needs the organizations to be ready to understand, how do you do that? How do you have a digital queue? How do you look at your loyalty program and segment customers accordingly to make sure you're not constantly making your best customers upset that they miss these great drops? The best brands are figuring out a way to peel off a piece of that inventory for their best customers. Those best customers have very high spend thresholds. So throughout your organization, whether it's marketing, merchandising, product development, the entire supply chain and all of your enterprise needs to be connected, and your speed with which you get the product from conception into the consumer's hands and ultimately liquidated is starting to increase. That requires a technology stack that most companies don't have right now. And so I really think moving into the future, I'm most excited about, number one, making sure our data sets are cleansed and normalized. We have our data governance models. We have the methodologies in place to be able to have this data feed these respective machine learning models, and then plugging them into all of our various platforms to help them help us understand what insights are most valid, how can we optimize, be better, appeal to our customers, and ultimately increase the levels of satisfaction that we're having, both from an operational perspective, but most importantly, on the revenue and retention lines.
There are 3 places that functions that can be characterized as AI or machine learning are most prevalent. It could be in a customer-facing function, and that's where you'll have talk about things like cashierless checkout or computer vision to identify, where something may be in a store or where a store associate may physically be at any moment in time. You have knowledge worker-facing solutions, and those are often often a lot of the digital tools that can help to optimize responses or optimize decisioning. And a lot of that's actually been around and well adopted in retail. When you look at, merchandise planning solutions or, kind of, kind of even just inventory allocation solutions, a lot of those have been using lightweight machine learning. And then the third area is in, field worker facing solutions. And that could be, a solution that is employed at a warehouse, or a solution that could maybe augment a store associate doing their job, like doing inventory counting. The challenge is that, a number of those solutions often require robots or hardware that are pretty expensive to deploy. A lot of that in the future can be automated, but there are still also questions related to service levels and asking questions, and kind of being able to aggregate individuals in some remote service environment where you can click on a button and talk to somebody remotely, and they can see where you are. They can navigate you through the store experience, or they can let you know if there's inventory available, online or at some other nearby store.
In stores, we're seeing from COVID, the increased use of QR codes and contactless delivery. And customers are very appreciative of the fact that we're implementing these various technologies. And I actually think the restaurant industry is doing even more exciting things that we potentially can introduce into our technology ecosystems, from digital queuing. Knowing that we have capacity constraints, at least here in New York, on how many customers can be in a store, instead of having customers stand outside the store, which is definitely not an exciting experience, giving an ability to give you a digital line number and then calling you back to the store the way restaurants are doing it, it's really exciting. But again, a lot of our platforms that we have, whether it's an API connection or, God forbid, it's a manual batch load, we need to start thinking about the future where it's as seamless and frictionless as possible. And these bolt-on and add-on technologies are low cost, but then easy to integrate and easy to maintain. So the future for technology, I actually think, is really great. It's just a matter of finding the right partners, making sure we do all of the business requirements gathering that's required, and then matching them to the technical requirements so that when these initiatives roll out, it's not the shiny new toy. It's actually, no, I want to take a QR code. I want to be able to scan it with my iPhone or my Android, check out seamlessly through Apple Pay or whatever the preferred payment method is. And then guess what? If I want to have installment payments, that's something else that I can offer. What I'm most excited about, and we're just really scratching the surface here, but I'm excited about the possibilities, is being able to have connected TV. As customers are cutting cords, it's become much easier for streaming mechanisms to understand who they're targeting. And that's not something that we could get when you simply have an ad on TV. Testing and figuring out what works, but again, combining all the great data that we have from a customer 360, a psychographic, a demographic perspective, we're able to actually target customers based on their viewing habits and based on all the attributes that we know about them. Now, other brands are screaming about having 250% increases in all of their metrics around television advertising and the efficacy of that. We're no longer the awkward teenagers. We're moving into adulthood and understanding how to navigate these things. But, I definitely, as long as the financials are there and the capability to survive exists, companies will come out of this much stronger than before.
This is something that's been a long-standing question and journey and tension in retail is, kind of what is the mothership and kind of what do you feed first? Do you feed the stores where that it's such an enormous expense and it is where the biggest investment is, and it's also where you have the best opportunity to have a rich relationship with your customers, or do you do you pay attention to the new shiny object where, the average transaction sizes are smaller and, kind of the customer churns faster? And it's been a big source of tension for retail. And, that's part of why we had seen, candidly, a pretty significant underinvestment in digital for years. That's why digital was always kind of seen as its own silo. It was always fighting for resources versus the stores. And it took so long for stores to even rethink the attribution model, and how do you measure the effectiveness of stores when more consumers are purchasing products in a digital first world.
At the end of the day, brands matter. At the end of the day, customers have a relationship with those brands, and they want an emotional connection. And I'm very optimistic at the future of what can be created and what will come out of this really horrible situation. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and there's a lot of opportunity. We need to prioritize and focus forward as opposed to looking in our rearview mirror.
We want to support you. Meaning lies within you.
Thanks for watching, and join us for the next episode, Innovation and Reinvention.